Dare great things for Christ. Christ calls us to dare great things. In the marketplace, as well as in the mission field, there has never been a time like the present for the spirit of the Catholic entrepreneur. Now is the time for men and women of great courage and great vision to engage our church and our culture. Now is the time to dare great things. And here is your host as we dare great things, Father Nathan Cromley, the president and founder of the St. John Institute.
Can power be a pathway to holiness? It's a provocative question, mostly because of the ways that we view power today. But what if I asked it differently? What if I said, could leading others like a servant of Christ make you holy? Most of us would then say, absolutely. The way that we view leadership has a lot to do with how we exercise it. In this second part of our series, I try to unpack for us how leadership, in fact, is a practical truth. Hey everybody, I'm so glad that you're back again and that we can go deeper here in our understanding of what it means to follow Christ into power. Now, I say that word on purpose, even though it's not really what I mean. What I want to say is to follow Christ into leadership, right? But the fact is, most of us confuse leadership with power. Most people in the world do anyway. I mean, the ambient culture around us looks at what we do every day as somehow a privilege that we have to exert ourselves over other people, as if they were somehow or other passive bystanders in the process. And, on the one hand, I think to myself, well, that's true. I mean, you can understand how there's a basis for that anyway. You look at it and there is when there's a leader, there's a differential between the person who's leading and then the people who are following. I mean, the leader has an office, or the leader has a title like mom, if you think about the way you lead at home, right? With leadership comes a recognition by the community that the influence that the leader is exerting is important for the community, for the followers, etc. And the more that leadership role is recognized by a greater community, well, the more that the power is given to that leader to exert that role for the benefit of the community. I mean, if you think about what a president can do in the United States of America, it's very difficult to impeach him. He has immunity, just like any global leader has immunity when they're leading their state. Why? Well, because obviously the state says we need a leader, and so we're going to protect the leader just for the sake of their leadership. Now so therefore they can, go many places. It's the same in the church. When you're a cardinal, for example, you have certain rights in canon law with respect to access and the visitation of monasteries and things that we don't really think about because they don't really attach our lives very much. But we see that trickle down into the world of business at the same time. Where, if you're the owner of the company, you can do things with bank accounts that you can't do if you're not the owner of the company. You're the owner of the company, you can sign off on different things for different permissions with the government, etc. So, and you can do that because you're at the service of the community that you've been entrusted with. Be that your family, be that your business, be that something in civic society. But all of it gives us this notion that there's a differential. That the person who's leading has a power over those whom they lead. Now, the question is whether or not that differential is bad. And I would even push it further to say, is that difference really something that is absolute? In a sense, I think anytime someone tries to assert themselves, we yield to them a certain power over the situation. So I know it's not really leadership in a technical sense, but in a sense, I think it's important for us to broaden our understanding of leadership. Because if we don't, we end up saying, I don't lead. And I think that we need to be cognizant of the fact that leadership is also distilled in very small things. Take, for example, if you're invited to someone else's party, right? And then people are sitting around talking and, playing cards and whatnot. Just when are you allowed to say something, to take the floor, to steer the conversation in one way or another? Well, politeness would have you refrain for a while, but then if you refrain the whole evening, you haven't been a good guest. So comes a moment where you simply have to step into that And when you do, people get quiet and they yield you the floor so that you can try to say something intelligent and not make too much a fool of yourself, right? But that's a form of leadership, right? Everyone yields their right to speak so that you can be heard. And so if you look at it from that perspective, yes, there's a difference, and yes, there's a power, but leadership is much more than that power, right? Having the power to lead is important so that the gift of leadership can be given. But the gift of leadership is something much greater than that. And this is important, I think, because sometimes there's a distinction. People ask, can such a historical figure who had a power position in a country, were they a leader? And there's all kinds of debates, because you could say, well, on the one hand, of course they were leaders because they effectively swayed entire nations to do their will. And so there were groups that were transformed, by their influence. And so they were leaders. But then on the other hand, can you really say that was leadership when it led the people down a wrong path? Like, does a leader have to be good? Does leadership have to aim at something that is truly good for the people? Well, I would say yes. Christianity, I think, would back me up on that. The reason for this is because when you take leadership and make it into something that could be good or for the bad, like you could lead badly or lead to the destruction of people or lead to their flourishing, when you say it could go either way, you've reduced leadership to power. You've said that if someone has the ability to manipulate power by leveraging things on the outside, things that are material, like status or title or social esteem, by manipulating those things, yes, you can gain influence over people, right? But are you really leading them? Well, you're manipulating them. I think there's a difference between a leader and a tyrant. Right? St. Thomas Aquinas in the Middle Ages made that distinction. And he said the difference between a leader and a tyrant is that a leader's service as a leader allows the people to flourish. So he brings them to the true good. His service as a leader allows the people under their leadership to truly develop, which is why if you don't have a sense of truth, I don't know how you can lead. You can exert power, and maybe you're really good at finding mechanisms to assert that power in creative ways, taking it in different situations and figuring out how to leverage that power to make influence. But if you don't know where you're going, then how can you lead people there, right? And so if you don't know where you're going is good, I'm not sure you can really say that you're leading. Thomas Aquinas would say, no, in fact, you're not leading. In fact, what you're doing is dragging people down with you by trying to cling to the power of your position instead of putting it into the service that it's supposed to have. Okay, so it's a fine line, but it's an important one, because every single one of us who has a position, who has a platform of power, from a title to a company, right, to a home, to the position that you have in a relationship, to a professional service that you render, all of us who have that position of power have to be keenly aware that that's only the beginning. That now, in order to exercise that power correctly, the way it should be, I have to put it at the service of the true good of the person whom I am influencing. All right, that's the key. What is the true good of that person? Now, all of a sudden, I'm looking for truth. Now, all of a sudden, I've got to think to the question, who are they? Where are they at in their life? What do they truly need? Why are they using my product or my service? How can I incorporate what I'm doing into that bigger picture of the overall flourishing of that person? And when you think about that with employees, it's the same way. My goodness, and an employee to the boss, and as a boss to the employee, it makes us stand aside from a purely functional vision of what we do in the world, right? And look at the people with whom we do it. We start putting our people first, not just because it seems like a nice thing to say, but because, in fact, it's the truth of what we're doing. And it allows me in the transaction that I'm governing or in the business that I'm executing to do it right, because I have a holistic vision of this thing. What I'm doing is not isolated from the people who are doing it and the people who are receiving it. And so I take that into consideration. Now I can give something through my power that's a true gift. I can give leadership.
Would you like to hear more from Father Nathan? Join the St. John Leadership Network and receive a 2-minute glance at the gospel every Sunday morning right to your phone. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
You know, I've always been really touched by the way that the Catholic Church, anyway, presents the vocation of the business leader. It's in a document from 2012 that came out of the Vatican, and it's a marvelous document in which it's called The Vocation of the Catholic Business Leader, and you can look it up online. It's wonderful because in this document, the Church literally says that business is a gift from God to the world. And of course, you can extend that and say anytime that we use platforms of power for the good, it's a gift to those who are served by it. And I think this is important because when we then talk about the truth, the nature of truth, it can become a terribly abstract conversation. And this is very deflating. No one really today wants to sit around and ask the question, what is truth? Okay, maybe very few people at certain settings do, but the average person really doesn't want to ask that question. But if I want to say, was this thing that a leader did good or bad? People are really more than ready to weigh in. And what their mind is doing is they're calculating whether or not that was a true good that they were given by their leader. And like I told you before, leadership depends on that truth. If there's not a truth in the goodness, if it's not a true good that you're giving, if the thing isn't really right, well, then you're not really leading. Instead, you're just playing with the position of power that you have. And one way or the other, it's not going to benefit the people. To benefit the people, the action has to be right. Okay? And not just something that's full of love, but something that's right. Okay? When we hear things that are good, sometimes we think it makes us happy. Well, things that are right don't always make us happy. But everything that is right is always good. So it's because what is good doesn't always make us happy. That's basically, if you want to think of it that way, but it's true. And my leadership, therefore, is it something that always makes my people happy? Or does it have to be something instead that's good? And you can see how it's difficult. Because if you want to stay in your position of power and you want to have influence over your people, well, then they need to like you. And so you want to make them happy. But on the other hand, if you are just liked by your people or just making them happy, but you're not really doing what's right for the company, well, then you're really not leading. I mean, if we did this in our families, for example, and we just made the kids happy all the time, gave them what they wanted, made sure that they didn't rebel, you could almost ask, who's really leading the family? Is it the kids that are leading the family because they're the ones that are being served? Or is it the parent that's leading the family? But you see how, it's very difficult because if leadership is an act of service, then in fact, you should say, as long as you make the people happy, you're a good leader. They will love you, they will esteem you, and in the end, they will be happy. Well, that's just it. Are they really happy? If you as a parent just give your kids what they want, odds are your kids will not be happy. Right? Because and I've seen it happen. We've all seen it happen. Spoiled kids become terrible people who are narcissistic, self-centered, selfish, all that stuff. You have to discipline the child to know what is really right and to go for what is good for them. And ultimately, of course, this means love. Right? So therefore, you don't give them everything that seemingly makes them happy or that they want. You give them what is right. Right? That requires a conscience and a consciousness. That requires a discernment of the intelligence to go beyond the mere seeming success of the people liking you into the real question of, have I done better for this company? And of course, there's a balance. Sometimes doing better means building up morale, and it means sometimes giving people a break. And, there's a flexibility here. But on the other hand, there has to be an ironclad dedication towards moving the needle in the right direction. Truth has to accompany our choices. I think this is why in many cases of leadership, many from companies to, I know in the military they do this as well, you're required to start reading a reading program as soon as you assume the role of an officer or you assume the role of an executive in a company. They want you reading and studying, because it's not just a question of the people, getting their way. It's a question of you leading the people on the way. Which means you need to know the way. You need to understand what's happening in the markets, in your environment, with industry, looking into the future. I remember one time, it was a crazy kind of talk, but I was listening to a talk by Jeff Bezos, and I don't say everything by Jeff Bezos is great and all that, but he certainly has been successful when it comes to his business. And he was giving this talk to senior executives of international publicly traded companies. Okay, so this is a very elite group of, very powerful and big business people. So it doesn't apply to everybody. But you'll get the point that he was saying. He was telling this group that their job was to make no more than 3 decisions a week. And of course, everyone's kind of chuckling, right? But as he goes on in the talk, he develops this point saying that, you are hired for your expertise, to make sure that the decisions that you make are the best ones. And so we need you the rest of the time being focused and learning, studying, listening, trying to inform yourself so that the decisions that you make are the best ones. So regardless if that's an exaggeration or not, or hyperbole on the part of Jeff Bezos, it's an interesting point. Just to make us go back and kind of think. If I'm a parent, for example, something really practical, and living it in my family, when was the last time we stepped back as parents and said, what's our plan? How is each one of these children doing in their growth? And how is our family doing in its growth? Wouldn't that be life-changing? Wouldn't that be amazing? I guarantee you that if you're a father of a family, the mother of the family is going to be ecstatic, and vice versa. I can't imagine that a married couple wouldn't be ecstatic to have the chance to say, yeah, let's reflect for a moment just on how we're doing, on what God is doing with us, on where our family's at. If you don't take that status of where you are from time to time, there's no real way to adapt what you're doing, change your tactics to render the result of that you desire. I got to bring this family to heaven. Well, how are we doing? How's each one responding? Where can we do better? What does improvement look like? These are questions any leader of a family needs to ask, because it's the same ones that we have to ask in our business as well. Even priests have to do this. I want to remind you, when a priest comes into a parish, right, the first thing that he needs to do is take an assess of the land. Where are my people? Where are their pinch points? Where do they need to grow? And that's how the priest then knows how to create his homily in order to address what his community needs to hear, so that the community can go from point A to a better point B. Okay? So in this way, leadership is more than just an exercise of power, and it's more than just giving people what they want and serving them in that way. You need to serve them in truth. And the question then becomes, where do we get truth? How do we know it?
Would you like to start your Thursday mornings with a scriptural leadership lesson? Join the St. John Leadership Network, where Father Nathan hosts a 30-minute call at 6:30 a.m. in all 4 U.S. time zones. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
Now, we've been talking here for a while about truth, and we've been talking about leadership and the importance of truth for leadership, but it begs the question, how do we know what is true? How do we get to a point where we can actually assert something as true? And I'll say this over and over again. When it comes to leadership, you can be bold in 2 ways. You can be bold because you have a lot of confidence, and so you have no problem, taking the helm of power. Just like a teenager can be really bold when they learn how to drive. That doesn't mean that they're driving in the right direction, number one, nor does it mean that they're driving well. It just means that they have no problem. I'm going to take the car and we're going to floor it and we're going to do this and this and this. And that's a sure way to get into an accident, right? Because leadership requires something more than boldness, something more than confidence. It's not because the kid's confident that they're a leader, but obviously, in the eyes of many, because the person's confident, it's then suddenly, well, everyone's going to follow them. It's a part of leadership. It's an attribute of leadership, and it's something that can help leadership. But my goodness, it's not the essence of leadership, because you could boldly go right, into the wrong place, right? On the contrary, more than confidence, you need something else. And this is where truth comes in. You can be bold in your leadership, not because you're just naturally confident, but because you're sure that the path that you're on is the right one. Now, I know that if the goal is making money in your business, that can be a difficult question. What's the right one? Because there's many ways to do it. And of course, the goal of business is making money. It's not the only goal, but it's essential. So I'm not saying that you always know the right path with certitude, because it's hard to know the right path. There's many ways to accomplish a business. There's many ways to do the same thing, okay? But when I say the right one, I do mean that you are morally certain that the path that you're on is a good one, meaning that you have a grounding for the decisions that you make. And that grounding involves a moral judgment. This is where it's important. Most of us would say, obviously, you have to ground decisions that you make in scientific research and understanding of the statistics of looking back at your chances for this or that. And I want to say, yes, you have to do all of that and be able to say that I have seen this decision in its moral context. If we're going to expand the company, for example, can we expand the company without decreasing wages? Or can we expand the company in a way that's going to offer more employment to the region? Or will expanding the company actually mean that we're going to have to close an entire plant down and decimate a small town? These are the types of moral considerations that have to be a part of that. Because you can't just say that, well, moral truth is not practical. Moral truth is very practical, because what you're doing is moral and it needs to be moral. You can't just say as a leader, well, I'm here just to exercise power. I have to bring people to authentic flourishing. So I need to therefore incorporate in my decision-making this aspect of, is this going to make my people flourish? And not just my employees, but the world. Is this going to be good for the world? And that leads to all kinds of difficult decisions. And what I find very interesting is that in our current context of intellectual thought, as soon as something becomes difficult, we abandon it. We say, well, this can be difficult, so you know what, I'm just not going to think about it. And that's why a lot of people in the end don't even ask these kind of ethical questions, because they say there's no way to know. One group says this, one group says that, and so there's no way I can be sure. And I want to remind you of something that Aristotle said that I think was fascinating. He said, when it comes to questions of morality, you do not have to have mathematical proof. You can't prove things ethically with mathematical certitude. You can prove them with moral certitude. Right? There's a different, so sometimes we say, how do I know for sure? Well, if you make your criteria the same, certitude that you have that the sun is coming up and that you're walking down the street when you are, well, you're never going to have it. That's because it's not that kind of question. But you can have enough certitude to move forward. And so therefore you look for criteria to give you this moral judgment. What's the first criteria? Of course, God's holy word, the Bible. And so understanding the Bible, which has been processed, of course, in the tradition of our church, in the lives and the hearts of the saints. So you can look at the lives of the saints, the stories of the saints, the examples of the saints. And then it's been, when certain questions come up, it has been clarified by the magisterium. So the word of God lived in the heart of the saints, and then clarified by the church's teaching authority in documents like the vocation of the business leader and addresses that the popes have given to people of business, and in different, sources of church teaching. Well, you've got all kinds of ways to inform your judgment. So to back up the decisions that you make. It's just that all those teachings will be universal. You're like, but in this situation, what do I do? The mind has to learn to apply the universal teachings, the vague and kind of general teachings that you get from the Bible, from the church, into the particulars of a situation. That's called practical wisdom or prudence. It's a virtue. And prudence is the thing that a leader owes his people. A leader needs to be prudent, to demonstrate prudence. This ability to say, yes, in general, here is the guidance. And in this situation, here's how I'm going to apply it. Okay, that's an act of the mind that we owe to our people. Can we be wrong? Yes, we can be wrong. Which is why what we need to do is then take that teaching and then think about it using the judgment of our reason. So, I mean, concretely, what does that look like? Well, it looks like we take a piece of paper out and we write the pros, we write the cons, we write the way this is going to impact people negatively and the way that it's going to impact people positively. We talk it over with counsel. We think about it with friends. We ponder this thing because we recognize that my role as a leader is to make sure that I bring you into what is authentically good for you. I can't just say what's good for the company is good for everybody. Well, no, it doesn't really work that way. The gift of my leadership is that the people who are influenced by my decisions are taken into account. This is the gift of leadership and the differential between just having power, right? But it requires to exercise that gift, the pursuit of truth. The other day, someone was telling me that the favorite quote, someone asked Pope John Paul II, what's your favorite Bible verse? And Pope John Paul II responded, "You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Well, that dovetails exactly with what I'm saying. That the truth of the faith leads us to be the best of leaders because it guarantees and focuses us in on what leadership is all about. It's about allowing people to become free, better, allowing them to live lives that are authentic and sound. And this is not just a privilege, it's the duty of every one of us who takes that power that a society, big or small, gives to us. We need to wield that power to make sure that our people flourish. This is what it means to lead in the footsteps of Christ.
Dare great things for Christ.
Share your feedback with Father Nathan. Send us an email at communications@stjohninstitute.org. That's communications@stjohninstitute.org. And visit www.stjohninstitute.org and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates from Father Nathan.